Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you all here. It's always exciting to see new faces and work with people that are taking on this great work of Title I programs to benefit our students in our schools. My name is Becky Donaldson. I'm the Federal Programs Coordinator here at the Utah State Board of Education. And my colleague Sandra Grant, Sandra is kind of going around wandering there, greeting people for a minute. Sandy is our Title I Fiscal Compliance Specialist. So I'll be covering some of the programmatic things, and Sandy can pitch in there as needed. And then there's quite a few fiscal things that you need to be aware of as new directors, and Sandy will take you through those pieces of it. And I apologize ahead of time. I have another meeting I have to get to, so I've actually set a little alarm on my phone for about 3:20 to remind me, or I'll get so caught up in this that I'll forget. But Sandy will be here if we're not finished by 3:30, and she can answer questions that you have or give individual technical assistance as needed. I want to thank some of our staff members. Renee Medina, you met Renee as you came in and picked up your packets and signed the roll. Renee is one of our support staff members. My secretary, Becky Peters, is back here in the blue at the back table. She keeps me kind of running and somewhat sane. She's rolling her eyes back there. This is Robert Palmer. Robert, would you maybe stand up for just a minute? Robert joined our staff in January of 2017, and he works in school improvement under Title I and also now with State Turnaround. And Val Murdoch is currently working in Jordan School District, but we have just hired Val. She'll be joining our team on October 2nd. She will be filling the vacancy left by Craig Kelly when Craig retired at the end of June. And she's going to be assisting us with monitoring and equitable services and a bunch of other things. We can just hardly wait for her to come. We're really looking forward to that. So we're going to go ahead, and I hope as we get around, we'll have a chance to meet each one of you individually and learn your names. Some of you I do know from previous work. Many of you are new, so please feel free at any time if you have questions. We're happy to stop and answer those. You're also welcome at any time to reach out to us via email or telephone, and we will assist you individually or even come out to your district or our charter school and meet with you individually if you need some additional technical assistance. So Title I. Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, the overall purpose of Title I changed just a little bit. So I've got it written there on that first bullet. And that is to provide all children with significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close achievement gaps. We were especially excited to see that because our State Board of Education's strategic plan is called Excellence for Each Student. And they have three imperatives in that plan. First of all, equity. Second is high quality learning. And the third one is systems values. So working with stakeholders, all the stakeholders, parents, community groups, other organizations around the state. And then as part of that strategic plan, they developed another kind of a short-term plan of goals. This is called Education Elevated. And so again, those things go right along with that. Those are things like closing the achievement gap, increasing the graduation rate, ensuring that all of our various populations of student groups, whether those are English learners, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, American Indian, all of those different groups that we break data out by, that all of those students are getting equitable, high-quality educations. Title I is the largest federally funded education program for public education. It originated in 1965 with the Elementary Secondary Education Act. President Lyndon Johnson signed that act into law in 1965. So Title I has been a program in our country now for 52 years. And the whole purpose was to provide students that are living in poverty and attending higher poverty schools with additional support to ensure that they are succeeding academically. It really evolved out of the war on poverty and the civil rights movement during the 1960s. So those are the roots of where this started. Every few years, that law comes up for reauthorization by Congress. So in 2001, when it was reauthorized, it was the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 that George W. Bush signed into law. Then in December of 2015, President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that's the most current reauthorization of that original Elementary Secondary Education Act of 1965. So with each reauthorization, there are things that remain and there are things that change. So some of what we'll be talking to you about today are some of the changes that came about in these programs as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And Utah's annual allocation right now, the last few years, has been around $86 million per year. So that money comes here. It goes out by formula to all of the LEAs across the state. So all 41 school districts and many of the charter schools receive Title I funding. So again, these are some of the goals of Title I. So again, primarily serving students to help ensure that they are academically successful, providing high quality, ongoing, job-embedded opportunities for teachers and staff members to engage in professional learning. A very key component of Title I is parent and family engagement. And then in ESSA, they added the provision of providing a well-rounded education, which under NCLB, it became most districts, even though there was flexibility, chose to focus most of their Title I funding on reading, language arts, and math. But there really is a provision now in ESSA that talks about a well-rounded education. So what are the requirements? Annually, each LEA has to submit a consolidated plan. This is a plan for their funding. One of the components of that plan is a needs assessment. So the LEA looks at their most current data, including student achievement data, survey data that they may have that they've gathered from parents and community members about what the LEA needs to focus on. And then they develop their budgets within that online grants management system. Currently, that system is the Utah Consolidated Application, or we call it the UCA. Next July, the UCA is going away because the entire state, starting with our governor's office, is going to be implementing a new statewide resource management system. And so there's been a contractor selected through a competitive process. I don't know the name of the contractor, but that's currently being developed across state agencies. And our finance department here will be working closely with each of the departments to make sure that that system includes everything that's required for each program that's being operated here in the state. When that plan is developed, it can't be just developed by someone sitting in their office alone, writing up what they think the plan should include. It has to include administrators, parents, the instructional staff. If you have secondary schools, those students can be involved in providing input. Anybody that works with Title I specifically, and then if there are external support providers that are working with your LEA, they can also serve as a partner in the development of that plan. We're not going to talk a lot about assessments, but there are some provisions about that you can use, you know, some locally developed assessments of your choice, formative assessments, benchmarks, different things that LEAs refer to those as well as the state end-of-level assessments. And I mentioned already that there's a requirement for parent and family engagement. So when you put together your budget in the UCA, if your particular LEA receives $500,000 or more in Title I funding, you must set aside a minimum of 1% off the top to support parent and family engagement. If your LEA is a small LEA or a charter school LEA and you receive less than that, then that expectation is not there. But the expectation is still there for parent and family engagement, just not the set aside. You need to have a school parent engagement policy that is shared with parents. It's posted publicly, made available online. A school parent compact, which outlines what the responsibilities are of the LEA, the responsibilities of the school, and the responsibilities of the parent to support individual students' education. Each year, every Title I school needs to hold an annual meeting. Many schools just incorporate this into their back-to-school night or a parent-teacher conference meeting. But at that meeting, they have to let the parents know that the school is a Title I school. Parents have the right to know what the qualifications of their child's teachers are. So if a parent comes in and wants to know if the teacher is qualified or a paraprofessional is qualified or special educator, that is a right that parents have, and the school have to provide that information to them. Parents need to have meaningful input into planning what those parent and family engagement activities should be, what they should look like. So traditionally, I think a lot of us have done this, and maybe some of us have continued to do it over the years. We tend to do things like once a year we have a family literacy night, and we invite parents in and we have activities about literacy. Or we have a family math night. Okay, a lot of parents don't participate in those kind of activities. What we really want activities to look like are what can we do that is really meaningful to help parents really serve in their role as a parent to support their children's learning at home. Okay, so it's kind of moving beyond some of those basic dads and donuts, moms and muffins, that kind of thing, into something more where parents are coming in as partners and teachers are sharing assessment data with parents, and then providing parents with some easy things they can do at home to support their children in learning reading. So little kids' parents can be helping at home by practicing the alphabet, letters and sounds. by working on some basic math facts that we know kids need to have in order to become fluent in math so that they can tackle more deep and higher level math concepts. Does that make sense? And then they also have the right to, to have access to assessment and achievement data for the school and for their particular student. We skip, okay. Okay, what schools are eligible for Title I funding? Okay, first of all, the percent of low-income children in that particular school must equal or exceed the district's average poverty rate. For charter schools, a charter school must have at least 10 low-income students, and that's by federal definition. And then in Utah, low-income students are typically identified in the October 1 submission. And so at that point in time, districts and charter schools declare how many students they have that meet those qualifications.
On the ranking of your students, if you're an LEA that has more than one school,
right,
then you follow the same as the district.
Okay, here's ranking and serving. So what Sandy was just talking about. So if you're a district or you're a charter LEA that has more than one campus, you have to rank order your schools from highest poverty to lowest poverty. This is called ranking and serving. Any school that has 75% poverty or higher must be served with Title I funding. And that doesn't matter if that school's a high school or what that school is. If it has 75% or higher poverty, the LEA has to distribute Title I funding to that school. So once you've identified any schools that may fall here, some LEAs don't have any schools with this level of poverty, then you're going to rank order the remaining schools, again, going from highest poverty to lowest, or some LEAs choose to serve, for example, if it's an LEA that has elementary, middle, junior high, and high school, they choose to concentrate their Title I funds at the elementary school level. And they choose not to provide funding to their secondary schools. So you may provide Title I services to a school, again, that has a poverty rate at or above the district average poverty, as long as you have sufficient Title I funds to spread that far and still give individual buildings enough Title I money to actually make a difference with it. Here's an example. So in this district, the poverty rate is 47.3%. So the Title I director has rank ordered their schools. When they get here to Drake Elementary, the poverty rate drops below the district average. So these two elementaries in the rank order would not be served. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? And all of this you'll be doing in the grants management system.
Than Adams. They can get less, but they can't get more than a person does school above them.
So in the UCA, this is referred to as per pupil allocation, PPA. So as Sandy said, some districts choose to give all schools the same amount. Some differentiate it. So some schools, large districts that have a lot of schools that have poverty and qualify for Title I, will sort of group schools. So they'll say, oh, we have these 3 really high poverty schools that have above 90%, 90 to 100% poverty. Maybe they're going to give those schools $800 per student. Then they get down and they identify another band of schools. And then there seems to be another kind of break. So maybe these schools up here get $800 per student. Then the next band of schools maybe gets $700 per student. And then maybe there's another division of a third group of schools that are lower poverty than that, but still higher than the district average. They can drop those schools down, say, to $600 per student. But as Sandy said, you can't provide this school that has 53% poverty with a larger per pupil amount than Adams that has 20% higher. Okay, and you can't skip schools. So we can't say, here's Robert's school up here. Robert's the principal of this school. I know Robert really needs the Title I money, and I know he's going to do good things. We're going to give Robert's school, say, $900 per student. And then we get to Butler Elementary. The principal at Butler's sort of iffy. We're not sure that that school really has a clear direction. That school needs a lot of help, so we're just going to skip that school. We're not going to allocate Title I money to Butler Elementary. That's illegal. Okay? Judy? Okay. Yeah, Castle Valley Center is a schooling that serves students from Carbon and Emory school districts that are very, very high needs, special needs students. So what Judy is saying, they choose to skip that school in the rank order of poverty because those schools have tremendous needs for special education, occupational therapy, physical therapy, a lot of other services that are being provided. Okay, so let's say we rank these and we had Adams Elementary, Butler Elementary, and then we had Cliffside Middle School. And then following Cliffside, say we had another elementary with like 48% poverty. We could skip Cliffside if it's a middle or high school, if we're choosing to concentrate the money at the elementary level. Okay, there are 2 kinds of Title I schools. You love my clip art because it says elementary and high school. Yeah, those can be 2 kinds. That's really not the 2 kinds of Title I schools. We could always say, oh, yeah, it's a regular district school, it's a charter school. Yeah, those are 2 kinds. We're talking about targeted assistance Title I schools and school-wide Title I schools. And there are different requirements for each of those kinds of schools. So targeted assistance schools, if a school has less than 40% poverty, or they're a school that has just been designated as a Title I school, they have to operate a targeted assistance program. And Title I funds in a targeted assistance program can be used only for supplementary services for eligible students. The school has to identify the most at-risk students in the school, the most academically at risk. And it does not go back to whatever their family's income level is. So it could be a student that comes from the highest SES family in that school's attendance area. But if that student is the most academically at risk, then they're eligible for Title I services in a targeted assistance school. And again, you rank order those students and make sure that you're providing services to the students in greatest need. So if you can't serve all of the students you've identified, then they're in rank order. You say, okay, I can only serve 10. I've got a few more kids on the list, but these 10 students right here are going to be the priority. And you have to keep documentation of that. Those lists also need to be fluid. So a child might be on that list for a while, and then maybe they make a lot of academic progress. So they can be moved off the list, and another student that you identified that's still at risk then takes that spot in the list. Yes. No. Yes. Yeah, how much funding you have available. Mm-hmm. It's really important in targeted assistance programs to avoid removing those students from the regular core Tier 1 instruction. Shouldn't be a pull-out program for these kids. Title I is always in addition to, not in place of your regular programming. Okay? So for targeted assistance schools, there is a checklist. You have a copy of this in your packet. It's this form printed on the green paper. So the items on this list are the kinds of documentation that you would need and the kind of things you would need to make sure you've done in determining which students are getting services and how those services are being provided. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The first part of the next school year, so that you have everything to the end of the school year, so you have your data all prepared, and then it'll be usually late summer, early fall.
Yeah, and it's important that you have that documentation in case you're audited. And when we do monitoring here, one of the things that they will ask, they come out to your district or to your charter school, and if you're offering these programs, is where's that documentation? Okay. So that's the first type of school. And the cutoff point there is the 40% poverty. If a school has less than 40% poverty, they can't offer a school-wide program.
Even if they're more than 40%, if they still choose to do the targeted,
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yeah, because it takes a year to build a school-wide plan. So you may have a school, say you have a school with 65% poverty. That's always been, maybe you've done your rank order and that school's been the next school right after you've drawn that cut line. And then you think, oh, the demographics in that school are really changing. The needs are really increasing. So the next year you determine, we're going to drop that cut line down and we're going to pick that school up. During that first year, they have to be targeted assistants while they're taking time to develop that school-wide plan. They have to do a needs assessment, develop the plan with all of the input of all those different stakeholders. Okay? So Title I school-wide, again, 40% poverty. They have to have a school-wide Title I plan that is based on the results of a comprehensive needs assessment. And they have to include some reform strategies to improve the program of the entire school. So this pink handout in your folder gives you more information about what the school-wide Title I schools are required to do. Some of you that have worked with Title I in the past might remember that under NCLB there were 10 required components. Under SNL there are only 4 required components. So if you look at the second page of that handout, the first component is the needs assessment. And there's a signature page here that's an example that you would have all these people make sure that these stakeholders were represented in that planning process. So the needs assessment is component 1. Component 2 is school-wide reform strategies. What is the school going to implement using their Title I funding that's going to improve the overall education program for students in the school? Component 3 are activities to ensure the most academically at-risk kids, even in a school-wide program, are getting additional services they might need to ensure that they're successful. So that may include tutoring, it might include summer school programs for those kids, or other kinds of services that goes above their Tier 1 instruction that they're getting to help them be successful. And then component 4 is coordination and integration of other funding sources and programs coming into that building. So Title I should not be an isolated program. It should exist in part of that overall school plan. So there's state funding that comes into play. There may be some local sources of funding. Sometimes schools have received competitive grants for technology or other things. So looking at all the funding streams that come into the school, special education, how can all of that be integrated and coordinated to make a really comprehensive, high-quality system for the entire school? So we're not looking at these siloed programs that exist in kind of a vacuum. Does that make sense? So our website's currently kind of being reconstructed to make it all ADA compliant. And we're working on updating a lot of our documents to ensure they're ESSA ready. But all of these things will be posted on our website with links to other guidance from the Department of Education and other things that can assist you in putting those together. Again, improving student academic achievement. The move in ESSA, those of you that remember NCLB, there was a lot of talk about research-based. In ESSA now, they've moved away from that, and now it's evidence-based. So looking at practices, programs, strategies, processes that have evidence to show through some studies that this particular strategy or practice or program, there's evidence to support that in having the ability to improve outcomes for various groups of students. Okay, so this is a new requirement. If schools are identified for school improvement, and we'll get to those a little bit about that in just a minute, and they receive Title I school improvement funds, they are required to, in their improvement plan, to indicate where their evidence-based things come into play, or they will not receive that funding. Okay, so they're really ramping this up. And it makes a lot of sense, because you think about sometimes, we go along, we've always done things a certain way, and it becomes a tradition. Well, we've always done this, we've always done that, we've always used the money this way. But then look at your results, and if your results aren't what you want them to be, then you need to re-examine that and think about, okay, how can we take these funds and really ramp up our program? One of the things that you can do is various ways to extend learning time for students. before and after school programs, summer school, intercession things, other kinds of extended day programs. That's just one example. Missy? Mm-hmm. We're going to be getting all of that out to you. We're going to be putting together a web page. There are some really excellent websites now that have been updated. There's a new one called Evidence for ESSA that comes out of Johns Hopkins University that has an online repository of different studies and programs that they have reviewed. There's the What Works Clearinghouse that's actually put together by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. The Florida Center for Reading Research is a really good source. Anyway, there's a number of different things. We'll put all of that together and we'll get that out to you as soon as we can. It may just be in a document with links at this point in time, and then we're hoping to get a website up and running to do that. So that was a great question, Melissa. Thank you for asking that. Becky, will you make a note of that, and we'll make sure we get a list out to everyone. The highly qualified teacher requirement that was part of NCLB is no longer there. Now it's called qualified teachers. And the requirement is that teachers meet whatever the state standards are in a particular state for teacher licensing. So whatever those requirements happen to be, it's no longer defined by the federal government as it has to be this particular thing. So here's this right now. So let's just call it highly qualified staff, no longer highly qualified teachers. So again, they need to meet those requirements. If they are a paraprofessional, the same requirements that were part of NCLB are still in place. So they have to be a high school graduate. They have to have done one of these. Taken and passed the Praxis Parapro exam. They have an associate's degree, or they have 48 semester hours or 60 quarter hours of college credit. And if the school is a school-wide Title I school, all instructional paraprofessionals must meet that requirement. Okay? So you can't have some parapros that you're saying, oh, well, this parapro doesn't really do that. We've given them this other task. They all have to meet that requirement in a school-wide. Katina? Yes, they have to be a high school grad and then one of these. Yeah. Okay, part of the plan as well should talk about professional learning opportunities that you're going to provide to support teachers and other instructional staff, as well as opportunities for parents. And again, if you're talking about implementing specific strategies or practices, if those are evidence-based things, then those evidence-based standards that are part of ESSA go into place. Okay, I'm going to pass this on to Sandy. Do we have any questions to this point about any of those things we've covered? Yes. Mm-hmm. No, you can remain targeted assistant. Then you've got to develop the plan. That's right. Any other questions? That was a great question. Deb? Oh, the set aside?
You can.
It's optional.
It's an off-the-top set aside.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Sandy will talk about, there are some required set-asides, and Sandy will get into that as she talks about the fiscal issues. And then there's some optional set-asides that an LEA can choose to do, but doesn't have to do. Yes. Oh, that's an excellent question. There are benefits to running a school-wide program. As we said, in a targeted assistance program, you have to identify the most academically at-risk students, and then you serve as many of those students in rank order as you can based on the amount of money you have available. So those services cannot be provided to other students in the school that are not on your identified list. In a school-wide school, any services apply to any student in the school, regardless, again, of what their own family's socioeconomic status happens to be. So if you hire personnel in a school-wide Title I school using Title I funds, those personnel can serve any student in the school. If you purchase supplemental materials with Title I dollars for school-wide, any students can use those materials. If you're purchasing technology, any student can benefit from those. In a targeted assistance school, if you purchase iPads or some sort of technology, only those identified students can use that. If you hire a paraprofessional for targeted assistance, they may only work with those students you've identified. So essentially, the school-wide program kind of removes all of those barriers to who can we serve and how can we serve and who can use this and who can't use this. It makes it much more flexible if you have enough poverty and enough funding to do that. You're welcome.
Go ahead. School-wide.
But you have other schools that are not. Does it still, your first year, have to be targeted assistance?
The first year that a school comes into Title I funds, it has to be targeted assist.
And then the next year.
Well, they can take that first year to develop their school-wide plan if they're over 40%. Other questions before we move on? Got it? All right, the fun and games time. Which way am I going? Okay. There's some set-asides that are required and some that are optional. So, equitable services. If you are a district who has definite boundaries, most charter schools do not have definite boundaries. So this applies primarily to districts who have an identified boundary. They have to work with any non-profit private school in their area. If it's a for-profit school, we're not going to worry about those guys. But they're a non-profit. Then you have to do the equitable services. Did we bring the new? Okay. There is a new form now to look at equitable services. So equitable services apply to Title I, Title 1C, which is migrant funds, Title II, which is for teachers, Title III, which is, English language learners, and Title IV, Parts A, which is brand new to this state, and Title 4B, which is after-school programs. So when you do your equitable services meeting with private schools,
you must include all of those titles. So you have to set aside funds to do that, how you're going to serve them. So this is one of the first thing, yep, comes off the top of your fundings.
Set aside any other money for any other purpose, that equitable services piece comes right off the top of your entire allocation in a school district. So before you take any money for parent engagement or any sort of district-wide initiatives that you want all of your Title I schools to have, preschool or something like that, this comes off the very, very top.
And then you must clearly identify with your private schools what services they're going to receive. And remember, it must be services. You are not giving them any money. That's the no-no. You can help provide services, but you can't give them funding. So the services then have to be clearly identified, and they have to be agreed on by both parties. Now, for this year, once you've done your equitable services checklist, those are going to be uploaded into the desktop monitoring. So for this year, that's where they're going to be. Next year, when we get the new grants program, I'm sure that we're going to put it in there. But for right now, it'll be in the desktop monitoring. So those of you that have private schools will have to upload that into that program. Another set aside that you have to have is those for homeless. So if you have any homeless kids in your district or in your school, there's a set aside for those, and that's a must. You cannot set aside less than your per pupil allocation. If you do, you'll get an error message and we can't approve your plan. Okay, so that has to be set aside. Now, some of you may also be getting the homeless grant for McKinney-Vento, and those can be used in conjunction with each other. So it just depends on whether or not you get that grant or not. Yes? No, we still have McKinney-Vento. I'm not sure how the new rules are, but I think you do. You know, that's not real clear how that is. It's basically, if you know how many homeless students you have, then you kind of set aside that for whatever you need for them. Might be busing, it might be supplies, books, paper. I would do an estimate. You can always change it later if you need to, but do your best guess. Yes.
Can you give me an example of services for homeless students that you've seen that have been successful with that?
You know, it varies from school to school, district to district, and sometimes it's a matter of busing them from a homeless shelter to the school. Sometimes it's a matter of helping to supply them with school supplies, paper, pencil, those kinds of things. It just kind of depends on what the needs are. But there's a wide variety of things you can use with that money.
So I'm just confused as to how it's set aside rather than it being part of like, so this would be maybe a homeless student that isn't part of a Title I school, maybe. A different
Yes,
set
this
aside.
money counts for kids that are not attending the Title I.
But they can also be attending your Title I school. Yes.
Even more money, supplemental money for those.
Right. It can be used for that, but most of them would be fee waiver anyway. Yeah. Yeah, but they can be used for fees if that's, that's the need that you identify. Services for neglected students, that kind of falls in the same category as homeless. Most of the neglected student money is for those students that are incarcerated one way or the other, either in a state hospital or a state detention center. Parent and family engagement, that's a big one. So And we did talk about that before. Any other questions on the set-asides? Yes. Normally what I remember, and this is a Jeff question probably more than me, but are those students who don't have a permanent home. They may be living with grandparents, they may be living with friends, but they don't have a permanent home. Campground, in a parking lot, in wherever. Yep, that's still homeless, unfortunately. Any other questions? Am I doing this right? Okay, optional. One of the optional things is that you can have an administrative set-aside. If you're doing that, we recommend that it's 5% or less, but that's an optional one. Pre-K programs is another optional one. If you want to do a preschool in your Title I's at the district level, then you can set aside funds off the top to do that. If you want to set aside funds for those kids that you have in your LEA that are in foster care, you can do that. And the other set aside is if you're in school improvement, those set aside for comprehensive support and for targeted support and intervention. Those are the new programs with school improvement. No. Comprehensive support could be all kinds of things. Depends on what they're needed. Yes?
On the early learning for preschool and kindergarten, can you opt to just add that to the per student allocation for each school if they're following?
You can.
Okay.
You can. Just depends on how you want to run those programs. Other questions? Okay. If you have a district managed thing that you want to do in all of your LEAs, the same kind of program, you can do that as a set-aside. Extended day, extended time for staff in low achieving schools, supplemental instruction materials, those kinds of things are also an optional. Okay, uses for Title I. Number one, and it's not on this list, but you can't buy food with this money. The only time you can pay for food with Title I money is if it's a family engagement activity. That's the only time. You can't have pizza parties for your students. You can't buy gift cards, those kinds of things for incentives. Okay, the money is to implement the school goals and objectives or individual support. Okay, you can't supplant. You can't suddenly pay for something that you've paid for with state and federal money and say, oh, well, that school's getting Title I money, so we won't give them as much state and local money. You can't do that. That's why we have a comparability report that you have to do every year to show that you're giving the same amount of money or an equal amount of money to all of your Title I schools that you're giving to your non-Title I schools. Mandatory report every year. That's due with your DMI, with your desktop monitoring. So it's due December 1st.
Andy, so I struggle with this because we have a per pupil allocation in the UPA.
Right.
And if we give more per pupil to the state school, then how do you do the comparability?
Well, the comparability report just says all you're looking at are state and local funds. The comparability report does not include any federal money. So you're only looking at, are you giving them the same amount of money, state and local funds, that you would any school in your district or in your LEA?
Yeah, it may not actually be the same amount because schools vary in size, number of students, number of staff.
But the overall averages. have to come out.
Their equitable share of all state and local funds neutral, so Title I sort of neutral.
Yeah.
Then Title I kicks in on top of that.
To help
Basically,
supplement.
cupcake with no frosting that every school gets. The Title I school gets cupcake with the frosting.
Yeah. Okay, the one thing that's brand new with ESSA is that you must show what your rationale is in dividing up all of your state and local funds. What's your rationale? Why are you giving these schools this much money and so on? So that's a new one. And yes. You still have to do a comparability report, but if you only have one school, it's just a one-pager. Okay? If you have more than one, you've got to do the full thing.
What's the rationale for dispersing local money?
Well, they just want to know that you have some kind of method to say this is how we're developing and sending out money. Yeah.
Yeah, just so you're not punishing a Title I school because they're getting Title I money.
That's
So,
the main
for
thing.
example, some LEAs want all of their schools to have an instructional coach. So you can't say, all right, we're going to use state and local funds, we're going to provide an instructional coach to our non-Title I schools. Title I schools, if you want an instructional coach,
You have to
only
pay
use
for it.
Title I money to hire that.
Right. And that's illegal.
That's supplement, not supplant. That's the plan.
Okay. One of the questions I always tell people, if you ask yourself, would I still do this if I didn't have Title I money? And if you would, then that's where your supplanting comes in. Okay. So if you would have done it anyway, whether or not you had Title I money, and you're going to change it, then that's supplanting. Question? Okay. Any others? Okay. Here are, yes.
Our secondary school, some of them are going through accreditation, and I was asked to allow a school that's a title school to use their title funds for accreditation, programming cost, the $900 bill. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, my non-Title I school.
No, that's a supplanting issue.
Allowed in the past, but I didn't buy it. So
Yeah, that
that's
would
what.
be
That's a supplanting issue.
It's like shame
Yeah.
on me being rookie. I said, no, I'm going to find out. It's not allowed.
No, that's not allowed. Okay, these are some of the uses of Title I money. So you can do it for supplemental personnel, your tutors, your paraprofessionals, those kinds of things, your PD, additional textbooks and supplies, extended day programs, early childhood programs, full or extended kindergarten programs. Now, the thing that you have to think about with the full kindergarten, if you're already offering a full day kindergarten without Title I money, you can't suddenly decide to use Title I money. But if you only have half day kindergarten that's being paid out of other funds and you need an extended one, you can pay for the extension out of Title I money because then it becomes brand new.
might be using state and local funds to extend one session full day in every elementary. A Title I school may then use Title I funds to extend a second kindergarten class. As long as it's in addition to, not in place of.
That's the big thing. Yes.
So if we wanted to add a paraprofessional in those, just to give them more help, and they were Title I schools, would that be okay? Just in the Title I schools?
Yeah,
Yes.
You're not providing a paraprofessional at all the others.
Okay. Other questions? Well, with counseling, that gets a little tricky. Sometimes that you don't have a counselor in the school and you find that you need one, that part of that funds can come out of Title I, depending on whether you're school-wide or targeted assist. If you're targeted, then that counselor can only work with the targeted students. If you're school-wide, then that works for everybody. The other thing that happens is suppose you have a counselor and you find that you really need, instead of a half-day counselor, a full-day counselor. Then that extension of the counseling services can come out of Title I money for that extra time because it's over and above what you had before. Yes. Okay. Accelerated curriculum, yes. No. No. These are just suggestions of things you could do that are allowable.
A few years ago, and I wasn't in Title I, and there was an audit made. They claimed we were deemed because we didn't have some counseling. We should have done better. Not true.
Not necessarily. It depends on the school and what the school needs are. So if in your needs assessment it says, yeah, we do need a counselor, and you don't have one, then yeah, that's one of the things you can do.
Traditionally, what if the full-day kindergartens happen in Title I school? Now what if non-Title I schools are starting to use their FTE to offer that? Is that still okay because it's the,
You're not using Title I funds to do it.
well, but if the title schools started it first and now non-title schools are doing it, is it still okay, or then does it become something because our district is paying for, for non-title school, allowing them to use their FTE to do that? Does it still take, you know what I'm asking there, does it become something, or is it because, well, maybe they're having higher classrooms than other, so they can have full day, and they're just using their FTE the way they want to? It just depends.
Yeah, yeah.
If every non-title school now has a full day kinder and the title schools are still paying for their title, then that's gotta stop.
Yeah. It's one of those really tricky.
It is tricky.
Yes. You, if yes. Yeah. You would be fine. Other questions?
Last one about the accelerated, one of the things that you can do with this is if you have students in your school that are really high achieving students and they need help paying for an AP exam or dual concurrent enrollment or something, you can use some Title I funds to make sure those students are not lacking those opportunities just because their family situation doesn't allow for them to cover those fees. So again, this goes back to part of that well-rounded education for all students in the school. So while we want to make sure that our struggling kids are getting what they need, we at the same time don't want to always be ignoring those really high-performing kids that sometimes also get lost in the weeds because they need opportunities as well.
Other questions? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the amount that maybe it's not
not have access to. Okay, an effective way to use your funds is called braiding your funds, how you're going to use different pots of money to help maybe do the same kinds of things. For instance, you're using Title I money because the student is low academically, but he's also ESL challenged, therefore you can braid those two funds to give that student some extra help. One of the things, if you've ever done the UCA before, you know that in our planning tool, it lists all of your funds that you are receiving from state and federal programs. And it asks you then, how much are you going to allocate for each of your goals? Okay, so how much of Title I money are you going to use for your reading goal? How much of Title II money are you going to use for professional development for your reading teachers? How much of Title III money are you going to use for those that are challenged? All of that kind of stuff becomes part of your UCA and your planning tool. So that kind of tells you how are you going to braid these funds together for student success. Questions? Well, it kind of depends on how you're going to use them and what kind of program you have, school-wide versus targeted assist. So, for example, let's say in your targeted assist school, you also have a student that has problems, handicapped or needs extra services for something. Then maybe you can use your IDA money as part of those services to help that particular student go on. So yeah, you can use your money however it works most effectively for students. Okay, other questions?
Tammy, there was a question here regarding Title II. Some of you have probably been aware that the president's proposed budget and the House Republicans in Congress recently passed out of committee their budget proposal. The president proposed eliminating Title II funding. That does not apply to this school year. Those Title II funds are already available. So what they're referring to is federal fiscal year 2018, which will be our state fiscal year 2019. There's always a difference there. So right now we're using federal fiscal year 17 federal funds, but the state is actually in state fiscal year 2018. So Title II is there for this school year. Next school year, we're not sure. The Senate committee has proposed in their proposal at this point in time to keep Title II in place. But now they've got to compromise the Senate legislation with what the House has put forward and come to a compromise. And then that will determine what the federal fiscal year 2018 funding levels will be. But it doesn't impact us right now. So some of you may also have Title IV-B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers after school competitive grants. That money's in place this year. The president proposed cutting that money for the next federal fiscal year. The House left it in their budget. Even though they axed Title II in the House budget, they kept Title IV-B in. The Senate, I think their Title II and IV-B are all in there. So we'll have to see what they actually come out with in the end. Yes. Title II did have a cut this year, but it wasn't a huge cut. I mean, it wasn't as much as it could have been. It did decline a little bit. We also had a cut in Title I funds this year, and that impacted some LEAs. Some quite a bit, some not as much.
Depends on how many students you have, to how much it cut you. Okay, Right now, I think all of you know that your reimbursement requests are made through the UCA. Oops, what happened? Becky, do you know what happened? I mean, it's over here, but. Okay, oh, there it comes. All right, requests should be made at least quarterly. You should also get your business administrators on task. We should at least have them quarterly.
Let us tell you from a state perspective what the issue is if you don't do that. We have some LEAs that let all of their funding sit, and then they make one big reimbursement claim, like at one time at the end of the year. What happens, though, is those funds don't reside here. They are back in the United States Treasury. So unless you guys draw your funding down, we can't make our draws on the federal government. And then we get angry phone calls and emails from the U.S. Department of Education saying, why do you have X number of millions of dollars sitting in this grant? What is going on, Utah State Board of Education? And we always say, well, the LEAs have the money. They haven't requested it in. And then the closer it gets to those funds expiring, the Department of Ed just ramps up. And then they start sending letters to the state superintendents and all of that kind of stuff, which then comes back on us saying, what are you guys doing? Why is this money sitting there? Please do not let your money sit there. Number one, it says to the feds, we don't need this money. LEAs aren't using it. We must not have a need for it. That sends a message to policymakers, and it's not the message we want to send. So, and we know it's out of your hands. It rests with your business administrators, and they all have their own ways of doing things. And but please, please encourage them that you need those funds drawn down.
That also applies with your state funds, because the legislature every year looks at those and says, well, if you're not spending these, why should we allocate them? You know, and especially on special funding, like if you have a parent engagement grant or you have an intergenerational poverty grant. The legislature looks at those every single year, and if we're not spending it, they're saying, well, we don't need it. We can take this out of the budget and use that money for something else. So it's really imperative that you guys spend the money. And they're supposed to be spent in a year, even though you have, in federal funds, 27 months to spend it. But it is designed to be spent in the first year. Okay, so before you can include reimbursement requests for money in this year, this fiscal year, your UCA has to be finished and approved, and they are due November 1st. Your desktop monitoring instrument has to be in and approved, and that deadline is December 1st. So if those two things aren't completed and approved, then I put a hold on your funds. You cannot request those funds until they're done. Now, the other thing that happens is that your assurances were due July 1. If your assurances were in on or before July 1, there's no problem. If your assurances came in after that, I'm going to audit your first reimbursement request for that year, because you cannot expend any money from July 1 until you turn that assurances in. So I think the latest one this year was August 29th. So that means from July 1 to August 29th, you cannot expend any of your FY18 funds. They're not allowable, because your essentially approved date becomes the day that those assurances were turned in. So be sure that you get your superintendents, charter leaders on the ball, and those come in on time.
They're the only ones that can submit those assurances.
Yep,
Program.
it's just the assurances. I know they have all been turned in for this year, and I have the dates on which they were turned in. So those just need to be aware. Now, the other problem that we ran into just today, was that the assurances used to have to be uploaded into your file cabinet. And because they were done differently this year, you didn't actually upload those into your file cabinets. Right now, people are getting an error message and not allowed to approve your UCA because of that error message. We're in the process of getting that taken out of there because it wasn't one of the things you had to do for this year. So if you get that error message, just be patient. It'll be fixed. So reimbursement requests need to be in by the 25th of the month. So if they come in by the 25th of September, you will get paid by the end of October, assuming I don't ask you to have that one audited. Okay? But there shouldn't be a problem. If it comes in after the 25th, there may be a problem getting it by the end of October. Okay? It may not be processed. Questions? Okay, at least one of your reimbursements requests is going to get audited. Okay? Now, if your BA only turns in one request for all of your money, that one will be audited, guaranteed, without a doubt. So just be prepared that if your business administrator is going to do that, they're going to have to send in their documentation. Now, as a general rule, when I audit them, I ask for two things. Number one, the general ledger report that tells me what they paid to who, how much, all of that stuff. And the second thing that I'm going to ask for is one time effort document for every person that's being paid out of those funds. Then if I have additional questions, I'm looking at your ledger and I'm thinking, what in the world is this? I may ask for specific documentation on a supply or a material or professional development, just so I have some added documentation. But normally, the accounting ledger and the time effort documentation is all I'm going to ask for, and that usually takes care of it. Okay? But every once in a while, I'm going to ask you for something else. So just if there's a question. Okay? Reimbursements, like I told you before, will be put on hold if you don't have all your documentation and everything approved. I may do an audit when we come to do an on-site monitoring, just to double check. Okay? Now, we're looking at a risk management kind of monitoring this year. We haven't got all the details, but some of the things are going to be, number one, did you turn in all your reports, all your information on time and when it was due? Do you request your money more than once a year? And how much money did you have allocated to you? If you have large sums of money that was allocated, you're more at risk of misspending those than if you have a little bit of money. It's one of the things that they're looking at to look at your risk management. Right now, we're still on our 5-year cycle. Becky, do you know if that 5-year cycle got posted on our website? The 5 years is the same as last year, but then we also had kind of the deadlines and the time frames for this year. Okay. If you haven't seen it, need a copy, let me know. We can send you one. Yeah. Who knows what will change. If you have audit findings, that puts you on the high risk list. If you have monitoring findings, if we find something that's been not right when we come out and do a monitoring, that puts you at a higher risk. Failure to submit your assurances by July 1 puts you at a higher risk. Other questions? We talked about the assurances a minute ago. All right, time, effort documents. Federally, you are required to have a time and effort document for every employee that is paid out of federal money, whether it's Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. You must have a time effort document for everybody that's paid out of any of those funds. Okay? And I think most of you know that. Maybe some of the brand new charters don't. Come on. All right, so there are two types of certification. There are the monthly certifications and the semi-annual certifications. You can do a semi-annual certification if the person being paid is only being paid out of that title money. They're not being paid out of state money. They're not being paid out of more than one title money, but 100% of their funds comes from, for instance, in this case, Title I. They're not being paid anything else from any other fund. Then they can do a semi-annual report that says, I guarantee that 100% of my time and effort was in support of approved Title I activities. They sign it and date it. Their supervisor signs it and dates it, and we keep it in a file. Now, the monthly certification is for those employees that are working on more than one cost code, more than one activity. Okay? So, same rules apply for everybody. You've got to have the name of the employee. You've got to have what their title is. What is their job title? How many FTAs or how many hours are they allowed per month or per pay period? That needs to be included. The dated. One thing that has to be included in there is the certification period. And it can't be June 2017 to December 2017. It must be from June 1st, June 30th. It has to include the day. Okay? The signatures have to be dated, and they have to be an after-the-fact certification. So that means if your dates go from July 1 to December 31st, those signatures have to be on or after December 31st. Okay? They can't be signed December 26th or December 18th when you're out of school unless you change your certification period to those dates. So those signatures have to be after the fact. More money has been paid back to the federal government because of time and effort documentation than any other single item. Okay? So those are critical. Okay. Now, with monthly certifications, it has to show 100% of their time and effort, no matter what program they're being paid out of. So if they're getting 25% of their money from Title I and 25% of their money from IDA and 50% of their money from general funds, it has to show all of that. Okay? Either by percentage of time or number of hours. One or the other. It doesn't have to do both. And again, it's the same information. You've got to have their name. You've got to have their title. You need to have what are the certification periods. Okay? Now, we did get a little caveat. There's one method that you can use that is an alternative method, and that is if your employee who works on multiple cost codes has a fixed schedule. That means they work with Title I students from 8 to 10. They work from IDA students from 11 to 12 and 1 to 3. They work with general ed, you know, whatever those time frames are. So if they have a fixed schedule and you attach their fixed schedule, then they can only have to do this every time that fixed schedule changes. So if it's a minimum of 6 months, they have to do it at least twice a year. But let's say that you have a fixed schedule for every quarter or every semester, then you can do that as long as you attach their fixed schedule, which means when I come out and monitor and I've got that fixed schedule in my hot little hand, I should be able to find that person where you said they were going to be. Okay? So it does have to be a fixed schedule. Question?
So back to our kindergarten full day. So they've been paid half the day with our general fund, the other half with the title. They might
Fit into that schedule because they have this fixed schedule. Right. Okay. Questions on that? Those are the two types of certifications. Any questions? Okay. We talked about all of this. This stuff is all there. Okay. This is what I'm working on right this very second before I came down to this meeting, is going through and looking at carryover funds. With Title I, carryover is 15% of your original allocation. So as I look at your 16, 17, this is what we're looking at, 16, 17, at the end of September, you can only carry over 15% of that money without a waiver. So right now I'm going through and I'm looking at everybody that has more than 15% carryover at this point. You have until October 25th to reduce that amount of money to 15%. Okay? The feds say that you need to have a September 30th reimbursement request. It needs to be in by October 25th because if you're going to do a waiver, that has to be in by November 1st. Okay? Now the waiver request says, I am requesting to carry over more than 15% because, and here's how I'm going to use the money. The waiver can only be approved once every 3 years. So be aware of that. You can't carry over more than 15% every year. That's not allowable. Okay? Yeah. If you have a small allocation, then you can carry over more than 15%, but you still have the requirement that you need to get in a September 30th reimbursement request. So we're hoping that that stops this carrying money over for 27 months without a request. We don't know. We'll see. Okay. Responsibilities. UCA is November 1st. Your desktop monitoring is December 1st. We really like to have at least 2 reimbursement requests. One is a June 30th request so that we can make our state reports, and a September 30th for our federal reports. Okay? Questions? Those are the 2 that we really do need to have. It helps. Okay. All of this stuff needs to be reported annually. Most of it right now is in the DMI or you've sent it in separately. Private school checklist is now going to be in the DMI and you will upload it there. Consolidated application is due November 1st. Your comparability report is also in the DMI, so it is due December 1st. That's part of that. Your assurances, you should have already done those, and your desktop monitoring instrument needs to be completed. On-site monitoring, again, we've got a schedule ready for this year. If you need a copy of that, let me know. We can get it to you to know who's going to be monitored. Now, with brand new charter schools, their first year of existence, we try to give them as much technical assistance as they need. Is that on the next slide? On the second year, we will do an on-site monitoring because they become at risk, okay? Because they're brand new to the system, we want to make sure that they're doing everything correctly. We don't want them to be put on a really high-risk list so that they do audits and other things constantly. So for the first year, those are the things that we'll do. Second year, we're going to come on site and make sure you really are doing everything you need to do. Okay? Questions? We've done a UCA training once this year. If you need specific help with UCA, if you will let me know, then we'll make arrangements to give you help on whatever it is that you need help with on those. Kelly Smith is our UCA help desk person. She can help you, or I can help you with any questions that you have. We're even willing to come on site if you need specific help. We can do that for you too. Okay. We're going to do our DMI training after the the November directors meeting. So we'll have the directors meeting in the morning, and those of you that need help with your desktop monitoring instrument, if you'll have your computers with you, we'll go through that and help you get that taken care of, or as much of it as we can at the time. Yeah, we try to walk everybody through it. You know, there are some things that you're going to have to upload, and you may not have those with you at the time, but we'll show you how to upload things, how to find resources, all of those things that deal with the desktop monitoring. No, desktop monitoring is not due till December. Remember, because we want the UCA done first, and then we'll get the DMI done after that. Okay, other questions? Okay, school improvement. I'll give that back to Becky.
There are quite a few changes in school improvement processes under Every Student Succeeds Act. So I didn't put all of the details here because some of it is wrapped up in the approval of our state consolidated ESSA plan, which is being submitted to the U.S. Department of Education today. So then we're waiting feedback to see if we need to make revisions. But let me just talk you through this a little bit. You may remember the last few years we had a flexibility waiver in the state of Utah that gave us some flexibility regarding some of the requirements of No Child Left Behind, because Congress was taking such a long time getting the law reauthorized. So under that system, the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools in the state have been referred to as priority schools. Then the lowest 6 to 15% of Title I schools in the state, or Title I high schools with graduation rates of 60% or less, were referred to as focus schools. Okay, both of those categories are gone. And so let me just tell you a little bit about the new ones. So the first category are called Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI schools. That includes the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools in the state. It also includes any public high school, regardless of whether that high school receives Title I money. If they have a graduation rate that is 67% or less. So these will be based on 2 consecutive years of data. So schools are going to be identified on an annual basis. So the first year schools are identified in those categories essentially become sort of an alert year. If they're in that same category the second year, 2 consecutive years, then they are fully identified. And then all of the requirements start kicking into place. No, I don't. Our data and people are working on it. In addition to that, 2 legislative sessions ago, the state legislature passed the State Turnaround and Leadership Development Act. That created schools in the bottom 3% of all schools in the state, whether or not they were Title I schools. Those schools were identified as turnaround schools under the state law. Okay, so what we're hoping to do with our ESSA plan, and it may require some additional tweaking from our state legislature, is just to identify the bottom 5% of all schools in the state, whether they're Title I or not Title I. But that, again, that's tentative at this point in time, and our state ESSA plan is not approved. Judy? What's that? We're not sure at this point in time. Right now, turnaround is the lowest performing 3%. Comprehensive support and improvement are the lowest 5%. Okay, and some of those things are changing. Okay, there are changes happening as part of the ESSA plan, changes happening with board rule that's currently being developed for that. So the second category of schools, yes, Deb? Yes. What the feds are saying is it's any public high school. I think states across the nation are seeking additional clarity on whether that includes alternative high schools. The feedback we had a few months ago from the feds when I sent that exact question, it was any public high school. So there'll have to be additional clarity on that. The next category, the TSI schools, are targeted support and improvement. And this applies, again, to any school, any public school, whether it's elementary, middle, junior, high school, or high school. And it's based on if the school has 1 or more groups of students, those disaggregated groups of students, that is low performing. Okay, that's an annual identification. And we know that's going to probably impact a lot of schools across the state. So they may overall be a school that in the state grading system might be getting an A, but if they're English learners, if they have a large enough population of English learners in that school and that group of students is low performing according to the criteria that's being set, that school might be identified. They might be a high SES school in an affluent part of the state. But if they have a low performing group, if it's students with disabilities, American Indian students, any of those different groups of kids that we break out. Yes, Lisa. All of that stuff is being finalized right now. So there's proposals in our state ESSA plan. We have to get feedback. There's board rule being developed and still a lot of work being done by data and statistics to make sure that we're capturing the right schools and not pulling in schools that shouldn't be there. And so there's a lot of work there. That's why I didn't give you a ton of details because some of this stuff is in flux. Kathy? Mm-hmm. then they won't be identified. Mhm. No. And that's good clarification, Kathy. So the first cohort of turnaround schools, the original law that the legislature passed 2 sessions ago said they were going to identify schools every year. So if a school was in the lowest performing 3% of schools in the state for even 1 year, and it was based on the school grading system, they were identified. Last session, that law was, so it started out, the first session is Senate Bill 235. Last year it was reopened by Senator Milner. Senator Niederhauser did the original bill. Ann Milner reopened it last year and they made tweaks to it. So now it's 2 consecutive years. So before all of that occurred last legislative session in March, there had been schools tentatively identified as cohort 2 of state turnaround. So they were identified last fall. Then people started working on that legislation and decided they were going to tweak it and change it to 2 consecutive years. So any of those schools identified last year as potential cohort 2 of turnaround, if they aren't on that list again this year when they've got those data and statistics run on that, if they're not there again this year, they are not in turnaround. There were 17 schools identified last year. So only out of that group of 17, if they're still on that list this year, they are in turnaround. If they improved and they're not there this year, they are not in turnaround. Okay? So then it's always going to be a 2-year process to get in, the same way as Title I is. That was one of the confusing things because schools were being caught up in both systems and different requirements. So parents of those schools will have to notify parents that the school is in improvement status. They'll have to have a school leadership team. They probably already have that. Most schools do. They have, for comprehensive support and improvement, those schools have to undergo a comprehensive external needs assessment. So it will be done by a group external to the LEA and external to the school. If they're identified for comprehensive support and improvement and turnaround. Yes, it will be an approved vendor. So that the vendor will do the needs assessment and work with the school on identifying the root cause or root causes of the school's low performance. Then they will have to take the results of this and revise or develop a school improvement plan that, again, that directly relates up to this. So it can't just be a plan to say, oh, we were going to get some extra school improvement money. We want to do X, Y, Z. Nope, if it doesn't relate to this, then the funds cannot be used that way. Okay, it has to include evidence-based practices if the school is receiving Title I school improvement funding. Then the LEA conducts a peer review of that proposed plan. It's presented to the local Board of Education or the charter board. Then, if the school is either a comprehensive support and improvement school under ESSA or a state turnaround school, those plans are submitted to the state board for approval. So there will be a committee of people here that will review the plans, and until they feel they're approvable, otherwise they'll send them back to the school. They'll have to make revisions until they're ready to be approved by the state board. Then they implement it, they monitor and report on it on at least a quarterly basis. And schools that are turnaround or comprehensive support and improvement will be required to work with people from the USBE school improvement team. Targeted support schools will work with the LEA to work on a plan of how they're going to provide additional support to those identified groups of students that were low performing. They do not have to work with us. They will not be receiving funding from us. They will work with the LEA to develop a plan and provide the needed support for those students. We will not be involved. If a targeted support and improvement school does not come out of that status in at least 4 years, they then are elevated to the comprehensive support and improvement level. Okay? Schools that are identified for improvement have a minimum or have a maximum of 4 years. So they have essentially a planning year and 3 full years of implementation. And then at that point in time, they have an exit. Right now, the Board of Education is working on revisions to the board rule about what are the next steps. Does the school get an extension? What happens after that? So those things are all kind of up in the air at this point in time. So I can't give you definitive answers. Judy? Do you what? Thank you, Jerry. The LEA level parent engagement policy, and then parents' right to know about the qualifications of their child's teachers and staff that are serving them. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Says parents have a right to know the qualifications of their student's teacher and tell them where they can.
Yeah, and how they can get that information.
And then the other way is just to announce it, send it out in a newsletter, just saying, if you want to know, this is the person you contact, those kinds of things. You don't have to list all of the teachers and all of their qualifications.
If there's going, oh, sorry, Sandy. If there's going to be a substitute in a classroom for more than 1 month that is not qualified, a teacher's out on sick leave or something, and so you have to find a substitute to take that class for 4 more weeks, and that person is not qualified under the state licensing system, you have to send a written notice out to all the parents of students in that classroom to notify them that, from this date to whatever date's going to be determined, their classroom is going to be staffed by a teacher that does not meet the state licensing requirements.
And if you even have a regular teacher that has not quite met all the requirements yet, you still have to send out that letter.
Yes.
Saying, this is a really good teacher and we're just waiting on documentation from another state or whatever. That holdup is that your parents have the right to know that. No, that's always been.
Yeah, that's how.
I mean, no, for the right to know.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So we don't have to send the letter out like we did them before.
No.
As long as they're state qualified, you don't
Yeah.
need to
Stay
send it out.
qualified, but I need to notify parents right to know in my website.
Yes.
Yeah, but you need to have something on there so a parent knows if they want to know that. Yeah, where can they come to get that information? Yes.
No, we need to make sure it's clear.
Yes. And then the letter goes home if a classroom is staffed by someone that is not qualified. Okay? Any other questions on that part of it?
Well, if they pass the praxis, then they are qualified. Either one, they still have to take that praxis test. So as long as they pass the praxis test and they're online to get that certification, then they're considered highly qualified.
Yes. Yes.
Basically, you just have to let parents know that you are a Title I school
Mm-hmm.
and what you're planning to do with those funds. What Title I is, how it's going to be used in your school.
Does that have to be a formal meeting or during parent conference?
It can be during any meeting.
Yeah. It can just be like back to school night. It can be, parents.
Needs to be a section.
Yeah.
Targeted assistance schools should also.
Yes.
Yes.
No matter if you're receiving Title I funds, you need to include that. And then you need to have an agenda that shows that that is one of these. We'll ask for that.
Okay, talking about the LEA and this report cards, I think as soon as those become available from this office, again, you can share that with parents at a meeting that you're holding. It needs to be communicated some way in at least 2 different ways. So it might be posted on your website, as well as, you maybe have it available if parents come in, you can hand it to them, or it can be sent home, however you want to approach that, but it's got to be a minimum of 2 different ways. If the school's a school-wide Title I, that plan needs to be available to parents as well. So again, it could be posted on the school website and then made available in some format in language that's understandable to parents. At least a 1-page summary. If the plan might be lengthy and you're not going to hand that out to every single parent, they're certainly not going to read it or want to be involved at that level, but at least a summary of what your school-wide Title I plan is and how the funds are being used. Okay. And here are some different ideas, things that principals and LEAs have used in the past of just different ways of making sure they have at least 2 ways of making that information available. This is our staff and contact information. Our email addresses are always firstname.lastname@schools.utah.gov for anybody that works in the agency. So I'm the federal programs coordinator over all of the programs that reside with our team in our section. Title II is housed in the teaching and learning section. And Title IV-A, which is the new student support and academic enrichment, is going to be a competitive grant. That's also going to be residing in teaching and learning. But Title I, migrant, neglected and delinquent, McKinney-Vento homeless, American Indian education, Title III, Title IV-B, which is 21st Century Community Learning Centers, all reside as part of our team. Okay. So those are the names. We've had some staff that have had some changes to their previous assignments. So Max Lang, who'd previously been our migrant education specialist for quite a long time, is now going to be working 100% on school improvement efforts. Robert was here in our meeting today. He's also helping with school improvement. Murray Mazzaros is over Title I-D, neglected and delinquent. He's part-time in our section and half-time in the career and technical education section. Jeff Ojeda is over migrant education starting this year, and also the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act programs. Sandy is over fiscal monitoring and desktop monitoring instrument. Val, who I introduced earlier, will be our new staff member joining us October 2nd. We'll be working primarily with Title I monitoring and assisting in other efforts. Dr. Christelle Estrada is our Title III specialist. Kim Augustin is 21st Century Community Learning Centers 50% and state gang prevention programs 50%. We have another new staff member, Camille Sheik, who will be joining our team on October 9th. She will be teaming with Kim on 21st Century, doing part of that, but she'll also be doing the IGP grants and the Partnerships for Student Success, which are state programs. Kelly Smith is a part-time support staff member. She serves as the UCA Help Desk specialist. So if you have questions about UCA, you're having problems with it or questions, you can contact Kelly. If you call her desk number, it'll ring on her cell phone if she's not in the office, and she's very happy to assist. Dr. Chuck Foster is our American Indian Education Specialist, which is Title VI in ESSA. Cheryl Ellsworth, who had been working with Turnaround, is now 50% parent and family engagement under Title I and 50% parent and family engagement under special education. And then Daphne Prince is another one of our office specialists, and you've met Renee Medina, who's also an office specialist. So that's our staff. What questions do you have at this point in time now? As you've been here and you've been thinking, any other questions that come to mind? Deb? Yeah, McKinney-Vento, our state doesn't get a lot of McKinney-Vento funds. It's around $400,000 per school year. It's not really very much for the whole state. So that money typically goes out on an application process for LEAs that have a large enough percentage of students to qualify for it. So some LEAs will not get McKinney-Vento. Jeff Ojeda is not here in this meeting today, but But you can check with Jeff. Yes, yes. So other than the required Title I homeless set aside that every LEA has to do, some LEAs that have enough homeless students will also qualify for Title VII B McKinney-Vento funds for homeless.
On that homeless set aside, is it correct that you do the same per pupil allocation?
As you do for Title I. Yes. And you're just kind of estimating how many students you might have. Yeah, it has to be at least the equivalent amount for your per pupil allocation, and then how much of that you want to allocate. It's an estimate.
Starting this year, we have a rounded numbers, we're using right to the penny. So on your reimbursement request, you don't have to round.
Any other questions?
Yes. If a school goes into actual identified school improvement, there will be a required plan for that, because there are other requirements that will kick into place in order to get those funds. If you're a targeted support and improvement school, it would just be part of your regular school plan. So it just depends. What we want to avoid is having schools have, 20 different plans. Because sometimes you'll have a Title I plan, then you'll have a trust lands plan, you'll have a special ed plan, and it just gets to be, you can't pay attention to all of those. And so the more you can consolidate into one good, solid overall plan that, and like we said, one of the components on that school-wide plan is leveraging your funding and your other resources and programs to have one really good, solid school plan overall. Yes. You would need to start working with your current plan, and then get working with that group of stakeholders, so parents, community members, other people that need to be involved or represented, and then you would do a needs assessment. And there's no formal needs assessment process, but you have to really look at what is our data showing, what are the needs of our community, our school community, and then determine what you want to include in that plan. So you have a year to kind of be meeting and working and developing that and discussing what you want it to be.
And then once that's done, then there's 4 weeks to approve it.
Yes.
And once they approve it, then it becomes your UCA plan.
So then, your designation in the grants management system would then change from that TA on the drop-down menu to the SW, sorry.
Other questions? Well, just know that we are available by phone or email if you have questions, and that if you need specific help, then we need to come out and help you.
So I'll be here about 15 minutes before I leave to go to my next meeting. Sandy will be here, so if you have something specific to your particular school or LEA, you're welcome to